The boss has infiltrated the area around the coastal supply facility and knocked out the soldier there. But we can't just leave him there to be found. I need you to get in there and capture the unconscious soldier using the Fulton recovery system. Do it quickly before he comes to. Snake, you can use the Fulton surface-to-air recovery system to send prisoners and unconscious mercenaries you encounter back to Mother Base. I know you've used the Fulton before, but just to make sure I'm not missing anything, let's review the steps.
Okay.
First, attach a balloon to the unconscious enemy or captured prisoner.
Right. I hook a wire to their waist, and on the other end of the wire, there's a helium balloon.
Right. Then we'll send over a chopper to catch the floating balloon with its recovery hook and reel it up into its cargo hold.
And that's it?
And that's it. We finished installing the recovery hook on the Huey.
Wait, Kaz. Something doesn't make sense about this whole process.
This again.
Well, normally, Fulton recovery is for when you're using fixed-wing aircraft. With a helicopter, Isn't it simpler to land and pick up directly?
Listen, Snake. You're going to be calling for recoveries repeatedly throughout your mission. We want to keep the risk of taking enemy fire to a minimum. The best way to get that done is to do the recovery in a high-speed flyby. That's what the Fulton surface-to-air recovery system is for.
Uh-huh. What's the real reason?
Helicopters are cheaper, and the repair bills will start adding up once the bullets start flying.
I thought so. Kaz, I know we need to keep costs down, but...
Boss, you really need to get rid of this whole army mentality. We're not the Pentagon. We don't have billions of taxpayer dollars to play with. And besides...
Fine. Just pick a reason that makes sense.
Helicopters have quicker response time. Sounds strange, yeah, but it works great. I promise. You'll get used to it before long.
Yeah, I hope so.
The mercenary supply base is situated on elevated ground by the coast. I heard them call it Puerto del Alba, Port of Dawn. They have perfect visibility of the area from up there. We did our best to sneak in undetected, but one of the guards spotted us and we...
What is it?
I'm sorry. You'll have to ask Professor Galvez the rest.
It's okay. You've been through a lot.
I am sorry. I just cannot.
You did great, Paz. I won't let your efforts go wasted. Kaz, what kind of shape is that plant the professor gave us in?
First time I laid eyes on it, I thought it was some kind of joke. It was a giant birdhouse, seagulls everywhere. We eventually scraped off most of the rust and bird crap. The underlying structure's intact. Little elbow grease, and we should be in business.
Who used to own it anyway? Whatever shape it's in now, somebody sank some serious money into building it.
From what I can tell, an American university built it as a research platform for ocean thermal energy conversion. The name's still on some of the rusty old power turbines. I'm guessing they must have had government and corporate assistance to build it too. But they couldn't solve the thermal efficiency problem, and the project was canceled. Then after the university abandoned it, a KGB front company scooped it up for next to nothing. At least that's my theory.
How'd the KGB manage to buy a plant built with American capital, front company or not?
Yeah, that professor is quite the operator. One other thing. The plant's set up so that it can join up with other plants of the same standard.
So, they were originally planning on expanding the place, huh?
Hey, let's give it a shot. We can get some more people together and build this place up into a proper home for MSF. You're with me on this, right, boss? Snake, you can use the Fulton surface-to-air recovery system to send prisoners and unconscious mercenaries you encounter back to Mother Base. I know you've used the Fulton before, but just to make sure I'm not missing anything, let's review the steps.
Okay.
First, attach a balloon to the unconscious enemy or captured prisoner.
Right. I hook a wire.
Remember why we created MSF, Snake. To provide military force to whoever needs it, wherever they are, regardless of nation or ideology. Our beliefs aren't all that lofty.
We just won't be the tools of any one country.
Exactly. We know only how to fight. But we refuse to live our lives at the whim of the state. The MSF seal is patterned after Pangaea, the supercontinent from 250 million years ago. Back then, the whole world was one landmass. One world. No gaps, no rifts.
Our strength will take us back there. What about you, Kaz? Any interest in expanding MSF?
You'd better believe it. I want to make us into an organization that doesn't take orders from any country. Just like you were saying, we have to be strong. Strong enough to defend ourselves. We need money, too. Money to train soldiers to fight. The way I see it, we make MSF into something along the lines of a new kind of business. A contractor providing the full range of military services. Not just combat, but logistics, training, weapons, outfitting, and R&D. combining the small footprint and exceptional performance of special forces with the raw military might of a full regular army. Only with that kind of power can we break free of nation-states. What I need from you, boss, is to go out and find guys we can bring back here using Fulton Recovery. Then tell us what assignment to use them for. I'll take care of the rest. Your old mentor, the boss. She was known in the West as the mother of special forces, right?
Nothing but propaganda.
Actually, it's not all that far from the truth. I heard the KGB just set up a counter-sabotage cell. Alpha Group, I think they call it. There's even a rumor that West Germany created a counter-terrorist unit within its border police after the debacle at the Munich Olympics. Back home in the States, they've got the illustrious Green Berets, the SEALs, and your personal creation, Foxhound. The seeds sown by the boss are beginning to sprout. Same goes for MSF, right? In creating it, you were carrying on the will of the boss.
Yeah. She taught me how to fight the hard way. She beat it into me.
And now, thanks to her, we can take on missions other than just conventional combat. After all, we've got the same mother as the Army's Special Forces. Still can't believe Professor Galvez was KGB.
Well, like the professor said, Moscow's hell-bent on communizing Latin America.
Yeah, the Cuban intel services are all in the KGB's pocket. You don't think he's got some kind of ulterior motive?
If the CIA is up to something, it's only natural that the KGB wants to know about it. But I doubt they're showing us their full hand.
We'd better watch our backs.
What do you think, Kaz? Why did Paz come all the way to Colombia herself?
It's a long trip to make just to be Exhibit A in Galvez's sales pitch. She's only 16, still a kid. Maybe we should take her wish for peace at face value. Costa Rica isn't alone. All of Latin America is getting swept up in the superpowers' Cold War. The whole ideological split between East and West. In the end, it's just a greedy scramble for wealth by the ruling classes. The Western bourgeois stand to lose everything if their countries go communist. After all, the communists want to abolish private property altogether. So the capitalist rulers desperately tried to halt the global spread of communism. Hence the phenomenon of red baiting. And the communists, for their part, didn't exactly stay true to their principles. They tried to escape class-based society, but between Stalin's autocracy and the rise of the nomenclatura, they ended up creating one anyway. Once people have power, they stop caring about equality. That's where communism, where society in general, reaches its limits. The rulers only care about their own gain. The opposing side becomes a risk factor that threatens the profit, and thus the ongoing struggle between capitalism and communism was born.
And now, nuclear deterrence is part of the picture.
Exactly. They say nuclear weapons are the reason we haven't seen conflict on a global scale since World War II. The thought that your opponent might launch nukes against you sort of makes it tough to start an armed conflict, especially now that they've got intercontinental ballistic missiles. Nowhere is safe.
Of course, all that has caused military expenditures to skyrocket.
Well, the only way to ward off a preemptive strike is to flaunt your own nuclear stockpile, and that's caused their numbers to increase exponentially, not just with regards to destructive power, but in terms of targeting technology too. Now they can hit a target halfway across the world with pinpoint accuracy. In a way, the space race was a demonstration of that technological progress.
And as a result of all that, we now have mutually assured destruction.
It's the ultimate form of deterrence. No one's going to launch their nukes knowing they'll be obliterated in return.
I don't know. The chance of somebody hitting the button by mistake is never zero.
You're right. Even with peace guaranteed by MAD, there's always the risk of an accident.
Nobody wants the world to end on account of some machines malfunctioning.
On the other hand, thanks to deterrence, we haven't had a world war since 1945, You gotta admit, it has been pretty peaceful.
Not that it matters to us.
People point at the nuclear arms and space races and call it a Cold War. I say if they're not shooting at each other, why not call it world peace?
Doesn't mean war is gone. Look at Korea. Look at Vietnam.
Well, yeah, but I'm talking in relative terms here. Besides, if war died out completely, we'd be SOL.
We're not warmongers.
And yet, we can't survive in a world that's at peace.
You got a point.
So it's been more than 10 years since the Cuban Missile Crisis, huh?
I don't think we'll ever forget it.
No kidding. Those 13 days starting October 15th, 1962, were probably the closest we ever came to all-out nuclear war. The Russians deployed nuclear missiles to Cuba. America responded with a naval blockade. Then Russia shot down an American spy plane. I was still a teenager back then, but I remember what it felt like to be one step away from nuclear war. The adults were freaking out.
If it wasn't for the Cuban Missile Crisis, there might never have been an Operation Snake Eater. And...
What's the matter, Snake? It's not like you to get all hypothetical.
I guess not. It was the reassessment after the missile crisis that paved the way for the hotline between Moscow and Washington, and also for détente. That's irony for you.
The Treaty of Tlatelolco was enacted to make Latin America into a nuclear-free zone. It bans the testing, use, manufacture, production, acquisition, storage, and deployment of nuclear weapons. The impetus was pretty obvious. The series of crises triggered by the deployment of nukes in Cuba.
Not hard to imagine. Those 13 days had the whole world frozen in fear.
Of course, the country that started it all, Cuba, hasn't actually ratified it yet.
Still, the treaty's backed by over 20 countries. Anyone flouting it risks becoming an international pariah.
True. Opinol would investigate, no doubt. I heard they used Japan's 3 non-nuclear principles as their model when they drew up the treaty. I think the Treaty of Tlatelolco might have been their way of asking nuclear powers not to use nukes against them. That's the biggest difference between the treaty and the 3 principles. I guess you could call it a 4th principle.
So Costa Rica abolished its army back in, what, 1949? Pretty gutsy move for a Central American nation at the time.
Yeah, well, they'd just come out of a civil war. I'm sure they were driven by a desire to avoid another tragedy like Paz said. But I think they had a more compelling reason. Army coup d'etat are a way of life in so many Latin American countries. Imagine seeing that up close.
No army, no coup. Makes sense.
Plus, their economy was in ruins. So they honestly didn't have any money to spend on an army anyway.
Yeah, but weren't they on less than friendly terms with Nicaragua?
Yeah, and in fact, Nicaragua did end up invading. But the Civil Guard fought back and the OAS brokered a ceasefire. The U.S. and the rest of the OAS had their back, and they used it to full advantage. For a quarter century, they survived in the powder keg of Central America. That must have taken some serious diplomacy. Even if the Civil Guard is pretty decked out for a police force.
Must be tough to be a country without an army.
Hey, Snake, mind if I ask you something?
Since when did you start asking permission?
So, you used to be part of a CIA paramilitary unit, right?
That's right.
Ever do any ops in Central America?
No, not personally. But there were other units who did all kinds of stuff.
I remember the Bay of Pigs invasion back in '61. The papers had a field day with it.
Operation Zapata. That was the CIA code name. The whole thing went south.
Then there was Che Guevara, being hunted down in Bolivia. I heard the CIA had a hand in that, too.
There were several units similar to mine. MSP, SOG. They'd recruit former special forces, train them as intelligence agents, and send them on deniable covert paramilitary operations. One of those units trained the Bolivian army in counter-guerrilla tactics.
And then had them shoot El Che.
So the story goes.
Around here they say La CIA instead of CIA, huh?
Nothing strange about it. That's how it's pronounced when you read it in Spanish.
It has the feminine noun ending "a," so they use the article "la." Apparently some people have taken to using the term UCLA.
That's a new one to me. What's it mean?
It stands for Unilaterally Controlled Latino Assets.
Meaning they're local agents?
Yeah, that's the idea. Washington uses them like pawns. Nobody knows who they really are or what they're doing.
You were saying Japan has a peace constitution too.
Yep. Japan renounced war in Article 9 of its constitution, aspiring sincerely to an international peace based on justice and order. The Japanese people forever renounce war as a sovereign right of the nation, and the threat or use of force as a means of settling international disputes. In order to accomplish the aim of the preceding paragraph, land, sea, and air forces, as well as other war potential, will never be maintained. The right of belligerency of the state will not be recognized.
You know it by heart.
Some things you never forget.
Impressive. There were some parts I didn't quite get, though. Like the whole means of settling conflicts thing.
Yeah, that's been the subject of debate. Whether or not it forbids any and all use of force. The current Constitution was originally drawn up under the Allied occupation. The first draft was even submitted by Allied GHQ. So naturally, there are some who feel the Constitution was imposed on Japan by foreigners.
Things like that are never simple. Same for every country, I guess.
One thing's for sure, though. Not having an army let Japan focus on economic recovery after the war. In that sense, it's the same as Costa Rica.
Kaz, you were in the Japanese Self-Defense Force, right? I thought that Article 9 you were talking about earlier prevented Japan from having an army.
Yeah, and that's another subject of controversy. The Self-Defense Force is an organization for the purpose of defense. Article 9 of the Constitution does not deny Japan's right to self-defense. Therefore, the SDF is constitutional. That's Tokyo's official stance.
Sounds complicated.
Call it what you will. It's a distinctly Japanese way of interpreting things.
The U.S. has military forces stationed in Japan, right?
Right. Even though the Allied occupation ended, American forces are still stationed there under the U.S.-Japan Security Treaty.
Unlike Costa Rica.
Part of it stems from the occupation, but Japan also occupies a key strategic position from America's perspective. It's next door to the Soviet Union, and close to China and North Korea as well. It's integral to the security of Pacific Asia. For America, Japan represents a barrier against communism.
What about for Japan?
As you might expect, there's deep-rooted opposition to the alliance. In 1960 and 1970, when the treaty was up for revision, there were mass protest movements against it, especially in Okinawa. The U.S. only gave it back to Japan 2 years ago, and American bases are still concentrated there. It's a heavy burden for the Okinawans to bear.
Then why don't they scrap the treaty?
Lots of reasons. There's the imbalance of power with the U.S., of course, and if Japan pulled out, they'd be losing the nuclear umbrella America provides. And as for whether the JSDF could defend the country after the Americans left, I really couldn't say. Costa Rica is in a similar situation. They depend on the Inter-American Treaty of Reciprocal Assistance, the so-called Rio Pact.
So, the countries with peace constitutions end up having to rely on other countries' armies. Kind of ironic.
On the flip side, not everybody in America is satisfied with it either. Some people argue Japan is freeloading off America's security guarantee. And you know how Japan's industrial exports are making inroads in the States.
Yeah, I've got a Japanese camera myself. Best damn camera around.
Japan's low defense spending allows it to invest more in economic recovery and expand its share of the American market. That's a bitter pill for Americans to swallow. You know that today, Japan is under the American nuclear umbrella.
Right.
The U.S. vowed to retaliate against any country that launches a nuclear strike against an allied country. That promise deters nuclear attacks against America's allies, hence the term nuclear umbrella. But suppose the Russians nuke Tokyo. Would America really nuke Moscow in return? If they did, the Soviet Union would undoubtedly retaliate. Would Washington really be willing to risk having a bomb dropped on itself in order to avenge Japan? I'm not so sure.
Don't tell me you're still worried about Japan. After all these years?
It's not that.
To be honest, I'm not convinced either. But Moscow faces the same dilemma. Maybe Washington wouldn't retaliate on Japan's behalf. Then again, maybe it would.
So you're saying Moscow wouldn't want to risk being attacked either?
The whole concept of nuclear deterrence is entirely hypothetical to begin with. When you get down to it, it's all smoke and mirrors.
Japan shall not possess, manufacture, or allow the introduction of nuclear weapons into Japan. Those are the 3 non-nuclear principles set forth by the Japanese government.
Allow the introduction? That's funny. Some of the U.S. warships that visit Japanese ports are armed with nukes. Or are you going to tell me they transfer them at sea onto other ships every time they visit?
You raise a good point, Snake. But the Japanese government doesn't recognize it as such. The introduction of nuclear weapons into Japanese territory would need to be agreed upon in advance. America hasn't made any such agreements. Therefore, they aren't bringing nukes into Japan. That's the official excuse.
Doesn't sound like much of an excuse to me.
I don't blame you. Keep in mind, though, Japan suffered actual nuclear attacks. Anti-nuke sentiment there runs deeper than you think. I suppose the government's not really in a position to admit that sort of thing.
So tell me, Kaz, how's the self-defense force you were in different from an army?
The JSDF is set up for national defense. It's not configured for aggression against other countries. It's what you'd call exclusive defense.
Exclusive defense?
It's the fundamental strategic posture of the JSDF. No preemptive attacks. Only the minimum defensive action necessary after an enemy attacks.
Anything defined as self-defense, then?
The JSDF originated as the National Police Reserve. Back then, American forces stationed in Japan were being sent over to fight in the Korean War. So in a sense, the NPR was filling a gap.
Police, huh? Reminds me of the Costa Rican Civil Guard.
Yeah, exactly. They're also dispatched to provide disaster relief. The year before I joined, they had a hell of a time trying to rescue some buses that got hit by landslides.